So one of the most interesting stories in the world of AI this week is this letter that Microsoft penned called Open Weights and American AI Leadership. And it's been signed by some of the biggest companies in the space. And I want to walk through why I think this is super important to pay attention to, because I think it's going to change how you interact and build with these AI models. Now, the TLDR on this letter is the fact that the US is actively exploring banning US companies from being able to use open source models coming out of China. The primary driver is a lot of Chinese labs are using industrial grade like distillation efforts in order to take the work that Anthropic, OpenAI, and Google have done building these state-of-the-art models like Fable 5 or GPT 5.6, and then distilling that knowledge into cheaper Chinese models and then selling those back to US companies. The US government feels like these frontier labs from the US are getting undercut by some of the frontier labs in China. And so they're trying to use some import-export controls in order to prevent the Chinese companies from basically taking all the market share away from the US companies. Now, here's my opinion on why you should care about this letter, because I think there's two important things to consider as you build with AI. The first one is if the US government stifles open source, what's going to end up happening over the next couple of years is a handful of companies are going to be able to really congregate all of the intelligence that comes from AI. And you're going to be stuck in a world where there's not really like a monopoly on AI, but there's going to be an oligarchy, similar to what's happening in like cloud computing, where AWS, GCP, and Azure are like the biggest players in the space across the globe. And it's really hard for neo clouds to be able to compete in that space. And so because of that, like we don't want to have that same thing happening with AI. And so I think open source is really important to help kind of the common man, if you will, or smaller startups to be able to use smaller models or even host models themselves in order to compete with the incumbents in the space. So that's one piece. The second piece to me is the fact that because AI is very expensive right now, a lot of innovation is happening in the techniques to train these models, to be able to train them in a cost-efficient way, serve them in a cost-efficient way. And a lot of innovation is happening at the hardware and compute layer. So if we stifle some of this open source innovation and basically not allow these companies to make money, like these Chinese labs, for example, what's going to end up happening is GPUs are going to get more expensive. The hardware that we're using to train and serve these models is not going to innovate and keep up with the pace of what we want to expect and what we expect out of these models in the future. So I think everyone loses in this scenario except for a few select companies. And so I think that's why it's really important if you're someone that's building in the AI space to monitor this, because in the future, compute is going to get very expensive. And if we stifle open source, you might only have a handful of options in the future to choose from to build AI capabilities within your business.